Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami, and this is episode 145. Today, I want to share a little bit of a conversation that we had in our Certified Fibromyalgia Coach training class a few weeks ago. One of our students, a family member of hers, had been in an accident that was both physically and emotionally traumatic. And the question she asked was, what do you do if you notice fibromyalgia symptoms in a family member? And I hear this sort of question a lot. It might show up as, what do I do if my kid is showing symptoms? Or what do I do if my sister, my mom, any of the men in your family for that matter? And how do we handle that? I think a big part of this question is knowing that fibromyalgia does have a genetic component. We know that you are 8 times more likely to develop fibromyalgia if you have a first-degree relative who has fibromyalgia. So that means for you, a first-degree relative would be your parents, your children, or your siblings. So you are 8 times more likely, or to flip it around, because you are listening to this podcast, you are probably the one with fibromyalgia. That means your family members are 8 times more likely to have fibromyalgia than a random stranger you meet on the street. Your parents, your children, your siblings. So what do you do if you start to see symptoms, or you see, like in the case of my student, a situation that might trigger fibromyalgia to be developed? So many people develop fibromyalgia after a severe illness or a traumatic event or a car accident or any other sort of physical injury. And so what do we do if we see somebody who's related to us who has gone through something like that, knowing all of these things? There's another statistic that I'm going to throw out for you too, and that is one that I learned in a chronic pain class that I took, and that is if you have an acute injury, so you have an injury, something happens to you today, if 6 months from now you are still experiencing pain, then it is very, very likely that that pain is going to be chronic. You're going to continue to have that pain. There's a lot of questions that brings up for me, a lot of things that I don't know about the research that gave that statistic. But one thing I do know is that means we want to treat things as quickly and as early as possible. So if you do have some sort of injury, we want to take care of it now and not wait, right? That also means that if you see something happen to somebody that you love who is related to you, who has this 8 times chance of developing fibromyalgia, you absolutely want them to be treating anything right away. Because 6 months from now, if they're still in pain, that means they are likely to stay in pain, and that is for sure a trigger for developing fibromyalgia. Some of the things that I hear from people are comments like, I don't want to plant that seed in their minds. And I really want to call you out on that, to be honest, because what you're saying there is that if you tell somebody they might have fibromyalgia, that means that their likelihood increases. There is a subtle implication there maybe even not so subtle, that fibromyalgia is a mental condition. And it is not. And you probably fight really hard to make sure that people don't think it's all in your head. So when we say things like, oh, I don't want to plant that seed that they might have fibromyalgia, you're basically saying that it could be all in their heads. Now, our brains are super powerful. The placebo effect is real, and so is the nocebo effect. If you haven't heard about that, that's when you acquire the negative side effects of a medication just because you've heard about them. And so, yes, that is absolutely real. But what is more real is your genetics, right? If you're talking about a child, a sister, a parent, they have an 8 times chance of developing fibromyalgia. So when you say you don't want to plant that seed, I hate to tell you this, but it's already been planted. It's in your genes. And so I want you to think about that. If you knew that you had an 8 times chance of developing breast cancer, wouldn't you live your life just a little bit differently? You might make sure you got those mammograms on time. You might make sure you're doing your monthly checks at home, right? You would do things differently if you knew your chances. If you had an 8 times chance of heart disease or having a heart attack, you would do things differently, right? So what about having an 8 times chance of having fibromyalgia? Wouldn't you want to know that risk so that you could maybe do some things differently? I sure would. The other thing that I hear often is that I don't want to label them. I usually hear this with parents talking about their children who are teenagers or younger, right? Juveniles who are displaying symptoms. And they say, I don't want them labeled. I don't want that in their medical history. And I do understand that one a bit because there is still some stigma around fibromyalgia. There are some doctors out there who think it's not a real illness. That is changing. We are getting better. We will eventually get there someday, but I do understand this one a little bit. But I want to go back to that risk factor. If they are 8 times more likely to develop fibromyalgia, don't you want to address that risk? Wouldn't you want to live your life differently? And going back to that statistic of if you are in pain 6 months after your accident, there's a great chance you will have chronic pain the rest of your life. So we want to address things early. That means early treatment. That means treating the little things before they become big things. So what do we do then if we start noticing symptoms in somebody who's related to us? I'm going to focus on the first degree relatives, the parents, the children, the siblings. But a lot of the tips I'm going to give you here actually could apply to friends that you're not even related to. So I've got 5 tips for you for what to do if you start noticing symptoms in a family member. Number 1, you want to aggressively treat any injuries. So if you're in a car accident, that means you don't want to wait and see how you feel in a few months. You want to treat that now. So that means going to the chiropractor, getting those massages, getting acupuncture, going to physical therapy, getting x-rays, MRIs. We do not want to wait and see. We want to treat it now. And we want to front load it, right? Don't just do a little bit. Do as much as you can right away up front and do all the things together. That may mean taking medication for a while you're healing. That may mean going to all these alternative therapies or taking additional supplements or doing things at home just to make sure that this doesn't end up being something you have to live with for the rest of your life. So treat any injuries aggressively. And I would include in that any of the mental or emotional injuries as well. So if you have been through a traumatic emotional experience, even though maybe you weren't physically affected, get that treated as well. That means going to counseling. That may mean psychotherapy. That may mean, again, medication. That may mean EMDR or who knows what all else. But get those injuries, physical, mental, emotional, get those treated aggressively right away. The second thing you can do is you can model what it looks like to really listen to and understand your body. Now, you may not be there yet. That's okay because you're learning, but you can model that learning. So, for instance, we really want to know the signals that our body is giving us. Is it saying it's time to stop and rest? Is it saying, okay, we could do a little bit more? And especially if you have kids at home, you can teach them this. You can teach them, what is your body telling you? What does it feel like? What do you think your body is saying? And normalize listening to your body. Normalize that respect towards your physical self. Same thing, of course, mental, emotional. You can sub those in there too. But how does that feel to you? And really model that. Model taking good care of yourself. Don't feel like you can't model this if your children are grown or if you're even modeling for your parents. People will pick up on what you're doing. You can make the world a better place just by living better, right? So definitely model that. And if you need help with this, this is one of the biggest things that we work with our clients on as coaches. And you can always listen to this podcast, read my books, go check out the YouTube channel that just launched, or hire a coach. We can help you with this. We can teach you how to listen to your own body so that you can model that for the people in your life. So that's number 2. Number 3, most of what I teach you is really just good living, right? I teach you how to listen to your body, how to respect your body, how to get better sleep, how to pace yourself and not overdo it, how to say no. All of these things are good whether you have fibromyalgia or not. So if you can teach the people around you these sort of things as well, right? Like the importance of getting a good night's sleep. If you start to notice symptoms in somebody, this is the first thing I would do is make sure they're getting good sleep at night. And again, that may mean treatment. That may mean medication. That may mean all sorts of things temporarily so that it's not a long-term problem. So number 3 is just living out those good things that you're learning that apply to everybody, no matter whether you have fibromyalgia or not. And number 4, this doesn't apply so much to friends that you're not related to, but for family members, for people who are at a greater risk of developing fibromyalgia because you have fibromyalgia, make sure they know that risk. I would just have that conversation with them, just like you would have the conversation if you were diagnosed with breast cancer or if you knew that heart disease ran in your family. That would be a family conversation you would have, right? Why not do the same with fibromyalgia? Why not teach them? These are what the signs look like. And if you start noticing them, let's talk about it. I've got resources that can help you. Have that conversation with your family, whether that's children, siblings, or parents. All of them need to understand there's a greater risk. And then my 5th tip for you is actually sort of a fun one. Go figure out what your fibromyalgia wellness style is. I've made a quiz to help you figure this out. You can find it at fibroquiz.com, and you'll also find it in today's show notes. But you can take that quiz and find out what your wellness style is. And you can have the people around you take that quiz too. If you notice, each of our wellness styles come with their own unique challenges. If you are a perfectionist, you are going to push through and do things regardless of how you feel and do them at 100%. That is who you are. If you're a playmaker like me, you're only going to do the things that are fun or that interest you. And so sometimes mundane things like going to bed on time or brushing your teeth are going to be difficult for us to do. Knowing those specific challenges for your specific fibromyalgia wellness style or your children's or your sister, your siblings, your parents, that can help you know what their challenges are too, and give you, especially if you've got children that you're raising, that'll give you a good idea of what maybe to work on with them. Now, it is important to note that small children, this quiz is not going to work for. It's not meant for that. But if you have, older teenage children or children in their 20s and up, you're welcome to try that, and it should give you some insights there. It can also give them great insights for things that they need to watch out for. So those are my 5 tips for you. Number 1, aggressively treat any injuries, whether that's physical, mental, emotional. Number 2, model really listening to and knowing your body. And if you don't, your first step, of course, is to learn how to do that, right? And model that learning as you're learning it. Number 3 is to teach those regular good life practices that you're learning here on the podcast. There is a lot of just regular good life in these podcast episodes, and you can model that and share them as well. Number 4 is to make sure that your family knows their increased risk for fibromyalgia. That's just a conversation that you should have. And number 5, sort of a bonus fun, go check out your fibromyalgia wellness style. Even somebody who does not have fibromyalgia will likely get some good health insights from this. Their challenges are likely going to be the same. And if this is a family member who has that increased risk of fibromyalgia, those challenges that I list in that quiz are the things that are going to potentially trigger or bring on their fibromyalgia. So if you know about them ahead of time, you can perhaps even avoid having fibromyalgia or developing fibromyalgia. Now, there's one other thing that I want to talk about here with genetics. Genetics isn't a guarantee. So if you have the genes, whatever they may be, that combine together to increase your risk of having fibromyalgia, that is not a guarantee that you are going to have fibromyalgia. You can look at, I've mentioned heart disease, I've mentioned breast cancer, same kind of thing, right? We all probably, if you're old enough, a while back, there were a lot of articles about Angela Jolie who had a double mastectomy because she discovered she had one of the BRCA genes, maybe even both, I don't remember. But that was one of her ways of compensating for those genes, right? If you know your family has a risk of heart disease, you're going to do your blood work every year. You're going to watch your cholesterol. You might exercise more. You might eat healthier. All of these things that you do help to compensate for your genes. Now, a great way of explaining this, I was taught this by a doctor many, many years ago, but you could think of your genes like a tattoo. Let's say there's a tattoo on your arm. What you do to help compensate for that, the protective factors in your life, is like a lace sleeve that you're wearing on top of that tattoo. The lace helps to cover up or reveal certain genes, certain parts of that tattoo, and that helps to change the outcome. So again, if you know you have certain genetics that might put you at a higher risk for different things. The lifestyle that you have, the protective factors that you include in your life, the things that you do, the supplements that you take, the way you take care of yourself, the stress levels, all of these things combine to either reveal your genetics or hide them. So, for instance, one of my genetic anomalies is that I have a short allele for serotonin. It means that my body does not make serotonin the way that it should. So, to compensate for that, one of the things that I do is I take 5-HTP every day. 5-HTP is one of the precursors for serotonin. My body can't make it, so I take it as a supplement, and that helps to compensate for that. Another example from my own life, from my own genetics, is I have one copy of the MTHFR gene mutations. This is a genetic anomaly that means that my body doesn't convert certain things right, breaks the methylation cycle, which may or may not mean anything to you. That's a whole nother podcast episode. But one of the things that can happen is you may take folic acid and your body needs to convert it into methylfolate to use it. That's part of that methylation cycle I was talking about. Knowing that my body doesn't do that quite right, I can sort of bypass that by taking methylfolate instead of taking folic acid. And again, this is a whole nother podcast episode on MTHFR, on genes, on all of this. But I just want to point out that just because fibromyalgia has a genetic component doesn't mean the people around you that are related to you are going to develop fibromyalgia 100% for sure. They have a greater risk, but there are things that they can do to help avoid that. So, I've given you 5 tips for what to do if you start noticing symptoms, but let me give you a few tips if you have somebody who is developing a few warning signs, like what do they do? So the first thing I would do is make sure you're getting good sleep. There was a study done years ago. This was not a fibro study. This was a sleep study. But in this study, they kept people from getting into the deep stages of sleep. And those people essentially developed all the symptoms of fibromyalgia. They had body pain, they had brain fog, they were fatigued, their sleep was bad. So getting good sleep is absolutely essential. And again, this may mean that you need professional help. That may mean all kinds of different things. There's a lot of things that, quote, help could mean, but that can be an important bedrock. The second thing that I would do is watch your diet. Now, I'm not going to tell you to, go crazy with anything, but one of the big things that we know about fibromyalgia is that we need more protein than the average person, a minimum of 80 to 100 grams. And for many people, that need is actually even higher. So you could just simply focus on making sure that you're getting enough protein in your diet, that the people that you love that are maybe showing signs are getting enough protein in their diet. Of course, all the usual healthy eating things go along with that, right? Like try to eat good, healthy, whole foods, not as many processed foods and all of that. But the most important thing is getting that protein in. And that actually may mean protein shake. That may mean, protein bars. So think about that, what you can do to add in extra protein. The third thing that I would look at for someone who is potentially starting to develop some signs of fibromyalgia is pacing. Learn what your energy budget is for the day and stay within that. The biggest way that so many of us end up with fibromyalgia is we just keep pushing through. Our body is giving us those signals that it needs rest, that it's too much, that you're stressed out, whatever it is. and we need to slow down. So help the people in your life figure out what their energy budget is and try to live within that. I have a podcast episode that I would recommend for this, and I will link to that in today's show notes. If you want to check out today's show notes, you'll find them at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/145 for episode 145. And the podcast episode is episode 35, and it's titled My Favorite Energy Management Tool. That will teach you some good tricks for how to learn what your energy budget is and how you can manage it. So just to recap, number one, make sure you're getting good sleep. Focus on sleep first. Number two, watch your diet and make sure you're getting enough protein. Above all, make sure you get enough protein. Number three, learn that pacing. And that may include things like learning how to say no so that you can say yes to the things that you really want to do, but start practicing those things early. And number four, the fourth tip I would give you for someone who is beginning to show signs is kind of going back to that first thing that I mentioned, which is treating things aggressively. Don't wait around. Get treatment early. It is so much easier to recover, to get your fibromyalgia into remission if we attack it early. The longer you go, the more symptomatic you become, the more problems you have, the harder it is. So if you see somebody who is showing signs, we want to get them good treatment early. So don't wait and see. Let's handle it now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there for you. Hopefully that gives you some good insights to what to do if you're noticing symptoms in a family member. And I also want to share this week's listener shout out. This really cracked me up, and I loved this message, this email that we got from Ginny in Canada. She said, "Your podcasts are so soothing. They help me fall asleep." She says, "Not because they are boring, but because I feel a sense of someone understanding me." Thank you so much for that, Ginny. And I am so glad that you have that sense of someone understanding you. I promise you, we do. And of course, it's even better if you can have a conversation with somebody, not just listening to me talking at you, but actually having a conversation. That is even better. All of our coaches have fibromyalgia themselves and get it. We've been there. We've walked what you're walking. And number one, we can give you hope that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and you can come through this to the other side, because even though all of us have fibromyalgia, we also have all found ways to feel better, and we can give you that hope. The other part of that, of course, is that we can give you practical advice because we've been where you are. We have walked that road. And so we can give you practical advice on how to go through that. Now, I also wanted to just send out a little request to all of you. I am starting to prepare for our next Ask the Coach episode. I do one of these episodes every 10 episodes. So this is episode 145. Episode 150 will be our next Ask the Coach. And I would love to hear from you some questions. What would you ask me if we were to sit down and have a cup of coffee or tea or whatever your thing is? What would you ask me? What would you want to know an answer to? You can send that in, and maybe I'll use it as an Ask the Coach. To send in a question, just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com. You'll see the contact link in the main menu, and you can send in your question that way. I would love to hear from you. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here for today. I will see you all back here next time. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stacklehouse. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.